The evening wind moved like an old memory through Dustfall Ridge, carrying the smell of red earth and tired horses. Lanterns flickered behind cracked windows, and long shadows stretched across the empty street as if the town itself were holding its breath. A widower named Elias Crow rode in slow, his hat low, his coat dusted from a day's worth of silence. He looked like a man wandering between yesterday and nowhere at all. That was when he saw her, a little girl standing by the horse trough, dust on her shoes, hair tied with a fraying ribbon, holding a bruised apple in two trembling hands. "Sir, can you buy this apple?" she whispered, voice so small it almost vanished in the wind. "My mama is sick." Elias felt the words strike something deep, something he thought long buried. For a moment, he just sat there on his saddle, not breathing, staring down at this brave-eyed child who looked too young to know the weight of fear. The apple shook in her hands. She tried to hide it, but he saw the hunger swimming behind her courage. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Rosie," she said, lifting her chin like a girl who wanted to be strong. Elias dismounted, boots crunching softly on gravel. He placed a coin in her palm, more than the apple was worth, and gently closed her fingers around it. "Take me to your mother," he said. Rosie nodded and, without wasting a second, tugged at his coat to follow her. The shack sat at the far edge of town, where the dust collected in lonely corners. The door leaned sideways on tired hinges, and the roof sagged as if it, too, was weary of carrying the world. Inside, a thin woman lay on a cot covered with a patchwork quilt faded from long use. Her face was pale, her breath shallow, but her eyes, her eyes, held a stubborn fire. She struggled to sit when she saw a stranger enter. "Sir, we don't take charity," she rasped, trying to smooth her hair with shaking fingers. "Mama," Rosie whispered, "he bought my apple." The woman nodded weakly, embarrassed yet trying to be proud. Elias noticed the nearly empty shelf, the cracked window letting in a thin whistle of wind, and the untouched bowl of cold broth sitting near the bed. The room smelled of dust, lavender, and quiet suffering. "Mara Lynn," she introduced herself, though the effort made her wince. Elias tipped his hat, voice soft, careful not to disturb the fragile dignity in the room. "Just here to help. Nothing more." Mara turned her face away, ashamed of the state she was in, and Elias, accustomed to his own shame, his own memories, respected her silence. Later, he walked Rosie into town to buy medicine and bread. Every step brought whispers. "That woman's trouble," murmured Mrs. Brigg as she swept her porch. "She'll bring you nothing but sorrow," muttered old Jasper Pike. Deputy Wade Harlan leaned against the jailhouse rail, arms crossed. "Crow," he said, "some folks can't pay their debts. Best you don't get tangled with them." Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said more than any argument. Rosie clung to his hand as they left the store, her tiny fingers warm in his calloused palm. "Mama's gonna get better now," she said, half hopeful, half begging the universe to agree. When Elias returned to the shack at dawn the next day, he didn't knock. He left bread and dried meat on the porch, repaired the crooked door with rusty tools he found leaning against the wall, and placed a warm blanket he'd brought from his ranch neatly at the foot of Mara's bed. She woke to the faint smell of pine and wool. Her eyes softened, but she said nothing. Pride held her voice hostage. Over the next days, small acts of grace took the shape of a quiet rhythm. Elias taught Rosie how to test the creek water for safety, how to gather fallen twigs without cutting her fingers, how to stack firewood so smoke wouldn't choke the chimney. Mara watched from the doorway, a shawl pulled around her shoulders, trying to hide the tears that often filled her eyes. One night, Rosie fell asleep by the fire as Elias showed her how to whittle a toy horse. Mara picked the child up, brushing her thumb across Rosie's cheek with a tenderness that almost hurt to witness. She looked at Elias, voice trembling. "You don't have to do all this." "I know," he said, and that was the thing. Help freely given has a weight different from charity. A few afternoons later, Mrs. Tallulah Brigg approached Elias behind the general store. Her voice came out sharp, but her eyes held a reluctant sorrow. "That woman's life ain't been easy," she began. "Husband died in a mine collapse. She wouldn't take offers from certain men to pay off her debts. That's why she and the girl got pushed out. Too much pride or too much dignity. Depends who you ask. Elias swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. He could respect a woman who clung to dignity, even when the world tried to strip it away. That night, memories of his late wife flooded him without warning. The soft hum she used to sing at dusk. The pine needles by their cabin door. The way her hand felt when it started to grow cold. He had failed then, not from lack of love, but from lack of time. And Mara's fading breath pulled at a wound that had never closed. One evening, the sky turned the color of rust as thunder rolled in. The storm cracked open with sudden fury. Rain whipped the shack's broken roof, pouring in through the holes like the heavens had split. Mara's coughing grew violent. Blood stained her handkerchief. Rosie sobbed, hugging her mother's waist. Elias barged through the door, soaked but determined. "We're leaving," he said. Mara tried to protest, but her voice collapsed in her throat. Rosie clung to Elias as he lifted Mara into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like she'd been carved hollow by hardship. The storm howled as he carried them both toward his ranch, each step heavy in the mud. Lightning lit Mara's face pale and fragile in his arms. Rosie tucked her head into his coat for warmth. By the time they reached the ranch, wind rattled the windows and rain hammered the roof. Elias laid Mara gently on the spare bed, wrapped her in warm quilts, and stoked a fire until the room glowed gold. Rosie fell asleep instantly in the armchair. Elias sat beside Mara as the storm raged outside. Water dripped from his coat onto the wooden floor. Mara's eyes, dim but full of quiet gratitude, flickered open. "You should have left us," she whispered. "Not again," he murmured, almost to himself. Not this time. He didn't know if she heard him, but he meant every word. The storm growled across the plains like an old beast settling down for the night. And inside that small room, a widower, an ill mother, and a frightened child shared a fragile, flickering hope. The kind that grows slowly, like a seed buried deep in winter soil, waiting for the faintest promise of spring. Mara woke to the scent of coffee drifting through a warm room, the soft crackle of firewood settling in a hearth, and the strange feeling of lying in a bed that didn't belong to hardship. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Her fingers brushed the quilt, thick, clean, smelling faintly of cedar, and she froze, afraid to believe the softness beneath her. Then she saw him. Elias Crow sat in the corner chair, worn boots planted on the wooden floor, coat draped over the armrest to dry from the night storm. He wasn't sleeping. He simply rested with a stillness that felt older than the mountains outside his window. When Mara struggled to sit up, Elias leaned forward. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You're my home. Rosie's asleep in the next room." Mara's breath hitched, part relief, part shame. Her hair clung to her temples in damp strands. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, as if covering the parts of her pride that were still bruised. "You shouldn't have carried us here," she whispered. "Rest," he replied gently. "That's all I ask." There was no pity in his voice, only a kind of quiet understanding, the kind that comes from a heart stitched together after being broken once before. Later that morning, when Elias walked into town for supplies, whispers followed him like wind through tall grass. Widower Crow's taken in that woman. She's trouble, always has been. She'll drain him dry before spring. At the general store, old Jasper gave him a long, thoughtful look. Some folks talk because their own hearts are empty. Don't let him get to you. But Deputy Wade Harlan wasn't so kind. He stepped out from a sheriff's office, boots loud against the wooden steps. "You should have left that woman and her girl where they belong," Wade said. "Her debts will still need paying. And don't get soft thinking you can fix what's broken." Elias didn't rise to the provocation. He simply gathered the medicine and broth he'd bought and walked past Wade as if the man were nothing more than an unkind breeze. But Wade's final words carried weight. "Rosie belongs in an orphanage if her mother can't provide." Elias's jaw tightened. His silence was a blade. When he returned to the ranch, he found Mara sitting at the kitchen table, pale but awake, Rosie leaning against her shoulder. A single candle flickered near them, making their shadows stretch together like a family that didn't yet know it was becoming one. Rosie leaped up. "Mr. Crow, Mama ate a whole bowl of soup." Elias smiled, and Mara found herself looking away quickly, the warmth in his eyes too much to hold. But their fragile peace didn't last. 2 days later, Wade arrived at the ranch with 2 armed men. Mara was standing beside the fence, steadying herself on a post when they rode up. Rosie hid behind her skirt. "Time's up," Wade called. "Debt's unpaid, mean the girl goes with us." Mara's face drained of color. Emotion, fear, shame, fury, rushed across her features so fast she couldn't hide any of it. "No, please no. She's all I have." Elias stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He moved with deliberate calm, like a man who'd already made his decision long before anyone dared question it. "You boys can turn around," Elias said. "Nobody's taking that child." Wade smirked. "You think kindness makes you a father? I think decency makes me a better man than you'll ever be." Wade's hand drifted toward his holster, but Elias didn't flinch. He didn't need to reach for a gun. His stillness was enough, the kind that made even the wind pause. Mara, trembling, grabbed Elias's sleeve. "Please don't fight. I'll go with them." "Leave Rosie." Elias gently set his hand over hers. "You're not going anywhere," he said, voice quiet but absolute. And something inside Mara cracked. Not in pain, but in a release she had been holding for years. A crack where light entered. The next morning, Elias sold 2 of his prized horses, animals he had raised from colts, creatures he trusted more than most men. The money paid every coin Mara owed. Wade had no more leverage. Mara protested through tears. "You had no right." "I didn't do it for rights," Elias replied. "I did it because you and that girl deserve better than fear." For a long moment, Mara couldn't speak. The depth of the gesture, it overwhelmed her. Not romance, not promise, just a man choosing goodness without expecting anything in return. Days passed. Mara's strength slowly seeped back into her limbs like sunlight returning after a long winter. She moved carefully around Elias's kitchen, cooking small meals. Her hands shook sometimes, but she cooked anyway. Being useful made her feel alive again. One evening, she mended a tear in Elias's coat. Her fingers brushed his hand when she passed it back. A brief, quiet moment. A spark small enough not to frighten either of them, but warm enough to be felt. Something in Rosie changed, too. She no longer hid behind her mother when Elias walked by. She followed him around the ranch, asking questions about horses, helping him fill water troughs, pointing out clouds shaped like cows. One twilight hour, Rosie dozed off, leaning against Elias's arm as he sat carving wood on the porch. Mara watched from the doorway, the fading sun painting gold across her face. She didn't say it aloud, but something in her heart shifted, softened, learned to trust again. But the world has a way of testing fragile hope. One late evening, Wade returned, alone this time, drunk, unsteady, desperation rotting his pride. He stormed into Elias's barn, kicking aside a pail, shouting Rosie's name like a threat. Elias was there within seconds. The lantern swayed from its hook, casting long, trembling shadows across the hay. "You keep pushing me," Wade slurred. "I'll take that girl and make sure she's placed proper." Elias stepped between Wade and the loft where Rosie slept, his expression calm but dangerous in its stillness. "A man who threatens a child," Elias said softly, "is already lost." Wade lunged. The struggle crashed against the barn walls. Hay flew. Boots scraped. Wade swung wildly, fueled by anger and cheap whiskey. But Elias fought with controlled force, every movement protective, not violent. Wade drew a knife, but Elias knocked it aside and pinned him to the ground just as Mrs. Brigg, who had seen Wade sneaking toward the ranch, burst through the barn door with 2 townsmen. The moment froze in lantern light. Elias breathless, holding his enemy down. Townsmen staring with wide eyes. Wade cursing beneath him. Everything changed that night. Wade was stripped of his badge. The town's gossip shifted from poison to humility. And Mara, watching from the porch with Rosie in her arms, realized something she had been too afraid to believe. They were finally safe. The next morning, The world felt washed clean after the storm of human hearts. Sunlight sifted through the cottonwoods, settling warm and honey-like over the ranch. Mara stepped outside, her hair loose, her face no longer shadowed by fear. Elias stood by the corral, quiet as always, waiting. Mara approached him slowly, Rosie skipping beside her. "We don't have anywhere left to go," Mara said, her voice barely more than a breath. Elias looked at her for a long, steady moment. "Then stay," he said, "as long as you need." Mara's lips trembled, not with sadness, but with something softer, something blooming. She nodded, and Rosie wrapped her arms around Elias's waist, burying her face against him. The world didn't shift dramatically then. No fireworks, no grand declarations. Just a quiet joining of lives scarred by loss, but reaching, slowly, toward hope. And sometimes, that's more powerful than love declared with loud voices. Sometimes, it's enough that the heart learns it doesn't have to walk alone anymore. In the years that follow, an old storyteller might recall this tale and say, kindness doesn't shout. It doesn't ride in with guns blazing. It shows up quietly, in a man repairing a door, in a woman choosing to trust again, in a child offering a bruised apple to save her mother. And if you ever doubt your worth, remember this. The smallest mercy you give may be the very thing that saves someone's life. And yours, too.